He stepped onto the range in silence. No rank, no name tag, just an old rifle and eyes that had seen too much. The recruits laughed at first, until every shot he fired hit the bullseye. What they didn't know was that this quiet stranger had once carried his team through war and walked away without a word. Today, he wasn't there to talk. He was there to remind them what silence could do. If you're new to the channel, then please subscribe and like the video. Tell us where you're watching from. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. The sun was just rising above the hills when the group of recruits gathered at the edge of the training range. The air was cool, still holding on to the quiet of dawn. Laughter echoed through the open field as young men and women, dressed in fresh uniforms, exchanged light jokes and confident grins. Today was the start of the Marksmanship Challenge, an annual event that had made and broken reputations for years. A clipboard passed from hand to hand. Names were called, numbers assigned. The mood was relaxed, buzzing with nervous energy and ambition. Everyone believed they had a shot at glory. Everyone believed they had something to prove. Then he appeared. No one noticed him at first. He didn't arrive with the group. He didn't speak. He just walked slowly toward the line, his steps steady but unhurried. His coat was old, brown, faded, and too big for his frame. His boots looked like they had walked through more years than some of the recruits had lived. No patches, no insignia, no name tag, just a quiet figure with a hard case in one hand. Someone near the front snorted. Guy looks like he took a wrong turn on the way to the hardware store. Another recruit chuckled. Maybe he's here to clean the restrooms. A few more laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from people too young to know better. He said nothing. He set the case down and opened it with care. Inside, a rifle, clean but old. Not like the new models the recruits were handed earlier. This one looked like it had stories, the kind that never made the news. Sergeant Melvin, the instructor overseeing the challenge, stepped forward. He was a large man with a square jaw and a loud voice that demanded attention. When he saw the unfamiliar man prepping a rifle at lane 11, he frowned. "You lost, old-timer?" he asked. "This isn't a public range." The man looked up briefly, then went back to adjusting the scope. He didn't speak. Melvin turned to the range officer. "Who cleared high?" The officer shrugged. "His name's on the list. Said he was cleared last week. Background check passed. Top-level clearance. I checked it twice." Melvin looked back at the man. He narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. For now, the old man was allowed to stay. The first round began. Recruits stepped up, one by one, each firing 5 shots at timed intervals. The scoreboard lit up with results. Most hit close to center. A few dead on. Cheers rang out. Pats on the back. High fives. Confidence grew with every round. Then the old man stepped up. His first shot missed wide. A wave of laughter rippled across the range. Even the instructors smiled. The recruits nudged each other. The man stood still, unfazed. He reloaded slowly. His fingers, slightly shaking, moved with quiet precision. Second shot, closer. Third shot, bullseye. The laughter stopped. Fourth shot, another bullseye. Fifth shot, split the previous bullet in half. Now, there was only silence. The recruits leaned forward. Some stepped closer to get a better look. They no longer saw an old man with trembling hands. They saw something different, something they didn't understand yet. The man kept going, shot after shot. Every one landed with perfect accuracy. His breathing never changed. His stance remained steady. It was like watching time itself hold still. Melvin crossed his arms. He didn't speak, but his eyes stayed fixed on the rifle, the man, the impossible consistency. Someone near the back whispered, "Who is this guy?" No one answered. The man never said his name. He didn't smile, didn't react to the growing awe around him. He just continued, each shot a quiet statement that needed no words. As the morning sun climbed higher, shadows stretched across the range. The scoreboard kept ticking, and every number next to lane 11 turned red. Perfect shot after perfect shot. What the recruits didn't know, what none of them could guess, was that this was no random visitor, no lost traveler. This was Leon Walker, a name buried deep in classified files, a name spoken in hushed tones among old veterans, a name once associated with a mission that never made it into public records. He had left the service 20 years ago, fading into a quiet life with no medals on his walls and no stories told. But today, for reasons only he knew, Leon had returned. Not for fame, not for recognition, but maybe, just maybe, because something inside him needed one more moment on the line. As his final round for the session approached, no one laughed. No one whispered. No one dared blink. They didn't know where he came from or why he was here, but they were starting to understand what he was made of. And this was only the beginning. Long before the shooting range fell silent that morning, long before the first shot cracked the quiet air, Leon Walker had already lived a life most people couldn't imagine. But he had never been the kind to talk about it. His story wasn't one that made headlines. There were no best-selling books or interviews on late-night TV. Just memories, tucked away like old photographs in a box too painful to open. 20 years ago, Leon served in a small unit known for going into places no one else could reach. They were the ones called in when the mission seemed impossible. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the strongest, but he was the one you could count on when everything else went wrong. The last mission that mattered took place in the dry mountains of Marja, deep in the heart of enemy territory. The details were never released to the public. The official report said a routine recon. But the truth was far from routine. Leon and his team had been ambushed. A hidden explosive tore through their path. 2 men were thrown clear. 1 was buried under rubble. Leon took a piece of metal to the side, but never stopped moving. Under heavy fire, he pulled all 3 teammates to safety, dragging them one by one across a dry riverbed while gunfire cracked above. By the time reinforcements arrived, Leon had lost a lot of blood. He could barely hear, but he was still standing. After the mission, he spent months in recovery. Doctors said he'd never fire a rifle again. Nerves were damaged. Hearing was mostly gone in one ear. But that wasn't what made him step away. It was the faces. The ones he couldn't save, the ones he visited at quiet funerals. He watched too many flags get folded, held too many hands in hospital rooms where the lights buzzed louder than the words people tried to say. So he left, quietly. No farewell ceremony, no speech, just a simple request to go home. He moved to a small town near the mountains, not far from where he grew up. He took a job at a fishing shop and volunteered at the local range. People knew him as the quiet guy who helped kids line their scopes or fixed a rifle that wouldn't fire straight. He never bragged, never told stories. To most, he was just Mr. Walker. But those who paid attention noticed something in the way he handled a rifle. He never rushed. He never missed. It was as if each shot mattered more to him than words ever could. Then, one fall morning, a letter came. Plain envelope, no return address. Just a name written in sharp, neat handwriting. Jacob Miller. The name stirred something deep inside Leon. Jacob was the son of one of Leon's closest teammates, the man he'd carried through the crossfire in Marja. He hadn't seen Jacob since he was a boy, barely tall enough to reach his father's boots. The letter was short. Jacob had joined the same academy Leon once trained at. He was about to take part in the annual shooting challenge. He wrote not to ask for help, but to thank Leon for saving his father, for being part of the story that shaped his life. The letter ended with a sentence Leon read more than once. "I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. If you're ever near the range, I'd be honored to meet you again." Leon sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. He didn't decide right away. He walked by the rifle case that had stayed closed for years. He stared out the window where the wind moved the pine trees, just like it had on that day in the valley. That night, he opened the case. He cleaned the rifle slowly, carefully, like it was a friend who'd waited patiently for his return. Each piece, each bolt, each part of it brought memories with it, both sharp and soft. He didn't tell anyone he was going. He didn't call ahead or ask for permission. He simply signed his name on the participant list and passed the background check. There were still a few doors his service opened, even after all these years. He arrived early, before the sun rose. He watched the younger recruits, joking, smiling, unaware. And for a moment, he almost turned around. But something kept him there. Not pride, not anger, something quieter, something deeper. Maybe it was Jacob. Maybe it was the promise he made to always show up when it mattered. Or maybe it was the voice he hadn't heard in years, the one from inside that whispered, "Let them see." Not the pain, not the scars, but the precision, the purpose, the part of him that never left the line, even when the uniform did. As the day began and as the laughter started, Leon Walker stepped up to the firing line. He didn't need them to remember his name. He just needed them to remember what silence could do. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying a quiet chill across the open fig. Dust moved low along the concrete shooting line as the recruits stood shoulder to shoulder, rifles loaded and nerves buzzing. The scoreboard flashed results in red digits, marking hits and misses with cold precision. Eyes glanced between numbers, then back at the man in lane 11. Leon Walker stood still. His rifle rested gently in his weathered hands, and his body barely moved. His stance was steady, his breathing even, but there was something more, something unspoken in the way he held himself. A calm that didn't come from confidence. It came from experience, from years of knowing exactly who he was and what he could do. His next shot came without warning. Another bullseye. There was no reaction from Leon, no smirk, no shift in posture. He simply adjusted the bolt and lined up again. Shot after shot, the results stayed the same. Perfect accuracy, perfect timing. Each hit wasn't just skill. It was a message. Not loud, not boastful, but clear enough that everyone understood. This wasn't luck. This was control. This was mastery. By now, the jokes had stopped completely. The recruits who once chuckled and whispered had grown quiet. They watched with wide eyes, unsure of what they were seeing. Some had trained for months to come close to this level. Others had read about records that no one believed could be touched. And yet, here was an old man, a stranger to most of them, changing what they thought was possible. Even Sergeant Melvin, who had started the day with doubt in his voice, now stood with arms uncrossed. His gaze never left the scoreboard. "What's the record?" one recruit whispered to another. 48 shots, all bullseyes. Under 2 minutes, came the reply. They looked at the timer. Leon was already at 36 shots, all perfect, and the seconds were still ticking under the mark. The pressure should have made him crack. No crowd had ever stared so hard. No moment had been more charged. But Leon didn't flinch. He wasn't chasing a number. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. This wasn't a contest for him. This was something else. His breathing was slow and deep. The movement of his hands, even with the slight tremble, stayed controlled. The rifle followed his rhythm, like it had for years. His eyes stayed locked on the target, not with intensity, but with a kind of peace. 40. Then 41. Then 42. The silence at the range was now absolute. Not even the birds nearby dared to break it. The scoreboard updated each second, a digital drumbeat counting down a moment that felt bigger than anything on paper. When the 48th shot struck home, a hush spread through the recruits. It matched the standing record. Then came 49, then 50, and Leon didn't stop. 51, 52. The final shot echoed a little louder, maybe because everything around it ached. The timer stopped. 1 minute, 47 seconds. No one moved. Leon lowered his rifle gently. He didn't look around, didn't wait for applause. He placed the weapon on the bench like it was something sacred. Then, without a word, he turned to leave. But something unexpected happened. Every single recruit stood at attention. No one had told them to. There had been no order shouted, no command barked. They just knew. It was something deeper than rank or rules. It was respect. Not for a title, not for a position, but for something they had never seen before. For something they had just witnessed. Leon paused at the edge of the range. He turned slightly, not fully, just enough to meet their eyes. Sergeant Melvin stepped forward. His voice, usually loud and sharp, was quiet now. "Sir," he said, "permission to shake your hand." Leon hesitated, not out of pride, but out of the weight that handshake would carry. He nodded once. The handshake was firm, brief. Not a performance, not a photo opportunity, just two men who had each seen their share of battles. A silent agreement passed between them, wordless but real. As Leon walked away, no one followed. No one needed to. But something stayed behind. A memory, a mark, a shift in the way those recruits saw the world and themselves. Because for the first time, they had learned something their instructors hadn't taught them. Something that couldn't be written in a manual or shouted from a stage. They learned that silence wasn't emptiness. It was strength. It was purpose. It was the kind of quiet that didn't hide weakness, but held everything that words could never carry. When Leon passed the gate, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because behind him, the silence he left behind was louder than any speech could have been. The wind had shifted by the time Leon Walker stepped off the range. The sky was still bright, but something in the air felt different. Not louder, just heavier, like the ground itself had witnessed something it wouldn't forget. He didn't take a bow, didn't wave, didn't say goodbye. He just walked. His boots moved slowly across the gravel, each step soft but sure. The rifle was no longer in his hands. It had been placed carefully on the bench, where it sat like a story finished. There were no medals pinned to his chest, no cameras waiting by the gate, only the sound of leaves brushing across the fence as he passed. Behind him, the range stood still. The recruits who had begun the day full of pride and energy remained frozen in place. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They stood with their backs straight, eyes forward, not because they were told to, but because they had seen something they couldn't explain. A young recruit named Eli stepped forward. He was the one who had written the letter, the son of the man Leon had once saved. He had grown up hearing stories, small ones, quiet ones, about courage, about sack, but none of those stories had ever shown him what he saw that day. Without a word, Eli raised his hand in salute. Leon saw him from the corner of his eye. He didn't return the gesture with a salute of his own. Instead, he gave a single nod. It was enough. Maybe more than enough. As Leon passed through the gate and disappeared down the dusty path, something else happened. Something no one expected. Sergeant Melvin turned to the recruits and spoke. His voice was steady, but lower than usual. "You just saw a lesson they don't teach in any manual," he said. "Some men speak through action, others through leadership, but very few, they speak through silence." Later that day, after the range had been cleared and the targets replaced, a small group of instructors gathered around the board where the range records were listed. The old numbers were still there, etched into wood and faded by years of sun. But by sunset, one new name had been added. No ribbon, no gold frame. Just 5 words, painted in black by hand. He spoke through his aim. No announcement was made, no press release sent, but words spread quietly among the staff, the students, and eventually the community. No one had ever seen such control, such calm under pressure. No one had expected it, and no one would forget it. Back in town, Leon returned to his small home. The lights were off. The porch creaked under his steps. Inside, everything was as he had left it, quiet and clean. There was no welcome party, no crowd, just the sound of a clock ticking in the hallway. He set his coat on the hook by the door. Then, from his pocket, he pulled out the small envelope Jacob had sent weeks ago. The letter inside was worn from being folded and unfolded so many times. He read it once more, then placed it on the table beside an old photograph. The photo showed 4 men, smiling in dusty uniforms, standing beside a battered jeep in a faraway place. Leon stood there a while, not smiling, just remembering. Then, as night settled in, he sat by the window and watched the stars appear one by one. Meanwhile, something else had begun to change. The recruits, inspired by what they'd seen, started training differently. They no longer raced to be first. They worked on patience, precision, control. They started asking more questions, listening more, rushing less. Even Eli, who once struggled with focus, found a new rhythm. He stayed after hours, practicing with the tools Leon had left behind, simple gear worn from use, but full of quiet wisdom. Weeks later, Eli found a package waiting for him on the edge of his bunk. No name, no note, just a leather-bound range notebook with initials burned into the corner. Inside were handwritten entries, pages of observations, lessons, tips, and reflections from someone who had walked through battles and come out the other side. At the bottom of the last page, one sentence stood alone. Listen to the silence. It will teach you more than noise ever could. For the recruits at the academy, Leon Walker became a legend, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't have to say. His story wasn't told in speeches. It was passed down in quiet nods, in shared glances, in the way people carried themselves afterward. He wasn't famous. He didn't need to be. He had done more with silence than most ever do with words. And long after his steps faded down that dusty road, the sound of that silence, steady, calm, unshaken, continued to echo, not as a goodbye, but as a quiet reminder of the kind of strength that doesn't demand attention. It earns respect.